How did you get into this business of YouTube videos?
It's my money, it's my time, it's my decision.
It's the first time I've actually been in conversation with somebody whose book title I'm unable to mention in public.
This is turning into a monologue and I couldn't care less. I want to go back to my Instagram reels or my YouTube shorts.
One day I'll be a former MP, but I certainly hope I'll never be a former writer.
Passion is very rarely a profession.
You're not living on savings from 80 Kearney and nearby, are you?
I believe that no one gets up in the morning wanting to destroy my life.
If you get into politics, I'm afraid you will find there are people who wake up in the morning trying to destroy your life. I must say, it's the first time I've actually been in conversation with somebody whose book title I'm unable to mention in public. But having said that, well done. You've got two of them out there. That's really terrific. And I was struck by the fact that you've dedicated your first book to all the failures and roadblocks in life. That takes some doing, and I have to say that's pretty impressive. How did you get into this business of YouTube videos, in which you've become a legitimate star, 1.45 million subscribers, I gather, and you've been particularly prolific in the last couple of years. I'm assuming that the book is very much a reflection of what you've actually been saying already on YouTube.
You hit it absolutely right on, Mr. Tharoor. The book is not so much the reason for where I am, but most likely the culmination of my life that's gotten me to this point. I've been an entrepreneur for 13 years now, and I've dabbled in the startup ecosystem, seen the tech environment of the country shape up from what it used to be in 2007, 2008, emerging India to what it is now, a mega shift in so many ways, more so in the audacity with which young India looks at itself. And
right, I like that.
I love that. Like I'm 42, and I so wish at times that I was 22. While I feel like 22, but I'm not really 22 because it's
don't
such
worry. I'm 66 and I still feel 22, so don't worry. you won't change. How you feel inside depends entirely on whether you allow yourself to
absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Whether you let the body do the aging for you and you keep your mind young.
Absolutely. And I was running a startup that at the end of 2019, I decided to step down from because I had a lovely team and I think I'd just done my dues there. And it just so happened that the pandemic struck. The world was in a completely different mood than what it was. We all had time, including me. And I started creating content around the things that I was passionate about, more so the failures that I'd made, which was just so many to count, that I thought that would be a full-fledged series of its own. And thankfully, people took it up and they resonated with what I had to say, because here was somebody who they thought had done it in life and been successful in it. And here I was admitting that, no, it wasn't all hunky-dory. And there were a lot of slips and misses across the way. In some way, just validating the journey that they were also experiencing. And that just struck a chord.
Success, I think, does come from qualities that you need to fail to acquire. And you really, you told people to embrace failure and to rise from it. That's remarkable. And I share that view entirely. But let's turn to your second book, because that's what I believe the publisher wants us to talk about. And I just want to say that I was struck by the fact that you structured it like a Socratic dialogue. You have a student asking a teacher questions. Why did you choose that format? Because your YouTube channels aren't like that, right? So how does that affect your relationship with the reader as well?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Certainly, the inspiration was the Socratic way of indulging. And one of my favorite books in the last 2 years was Courage to be Disliked, which also had the same philosopher-student dialogue embedded in it. And I write actively for those in their 20s, Mr. Tharoor. And what is reflective of that generation is that attention spans are abysmally low. For no fault of theirs, they were just born in a world that was just information overload in many ways that they could have consumed. And there isn't propensity to just read actively. And what's needed, which is at least my style of writing, is breaks. And breaks could be forced upon the reader, or could be just their own internal dialogue, hopefully translated into words on paper itself. So in the student-teacher conversation, my attempt was, as I'm navigating through the answers that I wish to share with them, they will certainly come up with their own questions. And can I preempt those questions and write it in that itself so that they almost feel as if I'm reading their mind? Even if I'm successful in that 10, 20%, I think that would have landed far better than them saying, you know what, this is turning into a monologue and I couldn't care less. I want to go back to my Instagram reels or my YouTube shorts and make it a nice, happy 60-second consumption as against read something which is consuming a lot more of my time and energy.
Fair enough. I mean, I must say, though, that you've got some very important thoughts in both your books about people finding their passion. And while I like you saying your passion is lying somewhere waiting to be found, you grow it by pursuing things that interest you, and over time, an amalgamation of all of those things becomes your passion. I mean, that's something people have to understand as well. Whatever that passion may be, how different, though, is that from that definition from terms like persistence, consistency, discipline, and so on? Because it's more than that. And can you explain that to the listener? What's passion that's more than just persistence, consistency, discipline?
I was deeply influenced by the concept of ikigai when I came across it for the first time, and that was several years back. And yeah, it's a beautiful, simple concept, a Japanese term that loosely translated in English means the purpose of one's being, and it's an intersection of
in French. Yeah.
Yes, and the four things that intersect to bring about your ikigai are things that you love doing, things that you're good at, things that the world needs, and things that you can make money from. And it's said that if you were to find something that intersects all of these four, that would be your ikigai. And passion for a lot of people just limits itself to things that they love doing and they're good at. And they very rarely go forward and say, is that something that the world wants? So for example, a lot of people could be passionate about singing or writing, but they never really ask themselves, how can I shape this into something that the world would want, desire, ask for? And if so, then can I make it into something that could make me a monetary benefit or outcome attached to it as well? And if you were to do that, then you basically have all the four tenets of what ikigai stands for. So I believe that passion has to be married to these remaining two elements to truly find the center of your purpose.
So would you say your ikigai lies in helping others to find themselves? Is that what you've now settled? You enjoy making those videos and writing these books. You're obviously very good at it. Arguably, a lot of people need that. And I suppose it's giving you a viable life. Or you're not living on savings from A.T. Kearney and nearby, are you?
I wish there were any from there. There wasn't. This literally had to be from scratch all over again.
Okay. Right. Now, you have a section in your book about how to deal with criticism. And that's an interesting problem. Certainly, those of us who write books, and I'm sure you may end up finding this out too, is that, every time you're getting a review of your book, you have to deal with criticism. And it's sometimes not fair. Sometimes it's obvious the reviewer just wants to sound clever and claim you haven't done something when you've done precisely that in the book, or you omitted something which if he'd only read page so-and-so, he would have noticed is there. But the truth is that's book reviewing, and that's a different matter. You've said in the past that you try to take criticism positively. Can you give an example of the kind of criticism you had to take positively and how it affected you or how you dealt with it?
So many of them on a daily basis. I believe if you become a public figure of sorts, and I'm sure you recognize with this at multiple levels than I ever can, there will always be people with a different point of view. And you have two reactions. One is of course, to get into some sort of a fist fight, even if not physical, but verbal in that sense. Or two, at least the approach that I follow, which lends sanity to my life, is I would focus on the message and try and distract or dissociate myself from the tonality of the message. And the belief in there, Mr. Tharoor, is I believe that no one gets up in the morning wanting to destroy my life. I could be wrong, but that's a big assumption at my part. And if that's the case, then for them to be propelled to say something against me, to say something that could hurtfully deviate me or be mean-spirited would in some way be something they want to share or communicate, but maybe not use the right words or the right tonality. And then it becomes my job, or at least I bear the responsibility of dissociating and abstracting myself from that tonality and just focusing on the message. And then the minute I do that, I have a choice. And the choice is to accept that message or to reject that. And I become then the custodian of that decision. So for me, it becomes immensely clear that, okay, this makes sense and I can accept it, or this doesn't.
Right. Well, if you get into politics, I'm afraid you will find there are people who wake up in the morning trying to destroy your life. I've had to live with a few of those. But anyway, that's a different subject. We'll go back to you. And since you're taking criticism so fairly, let me try one at you. You've said we have one life and don't need to be one person, which suggests that fulfillment is tied to having several outlets, several interests, and so on. But then how does that fit in with the whole idea of finding your passion and doing one thing to a high standard with a lot of consistency and persistence and discipline? Isn't there a risk you're actually encouraging somebody being a dilettante, somebody scattering themselves everywhere? There's a criticism that's flung at you.
Yeah, no, it's a very fair point, and I can see where this has come from. My reaction to that is very often, and I'm sure you will resonate with this, Mr. Tharoor, passion is very rarely a profession. Passion is actually the way that you conduct yourself. For example, my passion, or rather my ikigai, is to be a teacher. I believe that I am a teacher. I believe that I'm a good one at that. And I frankly couldn't care what is it that I'm teaching, because that might change. The mode in which I teach might change. The audience that I teach might change. The way that I deliver my teaching might change. It could be through a YouTube video today. It could be through a startup tomorrow. It could be through a book the day after. And that, frankly, doesn't matter as long as I'm centered on the fact that my ikigai is teaching. It's something that I'm good at. It's something that I love doing. It's something that certainly the world needs. And I found a way of making money through that. And as long as that is there, that will remain the center of my universe. But a lot of people would think of passion as, oh, I need to be a digital marketer. I need to be a sales professional. I need to be a CEO. I need to be X, Y, which is more often than not a designation in a company or an industry. And that's very limiting. It's a parochial view of what passion could be. And that's at least my attempt. Please broaden it. Think of it as very different. Like I'd argue, and I'd love to have this answer from you, Mr. Tharoor. What do you recognize yourself with? And I'm sure a politician is perhaps one of the many, if not the last one of it all. But I'd love to know, like, what is that one thing that Shashi Tharoor recognizes himself with?
I would have to have a challenge. I mean, it is a challenge trying to answer that because, I've said once to an interviewer, look, I'm already a former minister. One day I'll be a former MP, but I certainly hope I'll never be a former writer. And that suggests that to me, where I really think my biggest passion, my biggest contribution, and my ultimate legacy will be in the words I leave behind and the ideas that they embody. That's I suppose, the answer I would give. But yet I'm spending an awful lot of time doing stuff that doesn't necessarily involve a lot of thinking and ideas. A lot of politics, especially retail politics. I'm a Lok Sabha MP, not a Rajya Sabha one. So I get elected and I'm accountable to constituents. And what they want is often jobs, transfers, sifarish of various sorts, calls to employers, calls to banks they borrowed money from and need loan waivers on, personal favors of various sorts. And they expect that the MP who represents them has the clout to deliver those favors for them. And whereas in many Western democracies, most of the things that I'm asked by my constituents to do would not pass the ethical smell test. I mean, MPs would not be supposed to be doing those things in those countries. In India, you're judged by that. If you don't do those things, you don't get re-elected. It's as simple as that. And so you spend a lot of your time doing favors for people, and that doesn't take very much by way of either intellectual content or indeed satisfaction of actually having applied your mind and come up with an original initiative. So it's perhaps 10% of my political life that involves coming up with new ideas, initiatives, making a contribution to policy by debates in parliament, or if you are in government, then through the decisions you make. And that's something which I'm afraid, is a different sort of approach. I do think that in terms of my life, I've always tried to make a difference, but the ways in which I've tried to make a difference, first through my work at the United Nations, second through my writing, third through my public speeches, and now also through my efforts as an elected representative, all of that represents being many people, as it were. Your motto of you have one life, but you don't need to be one person. Well, in that sense, I'm not just one person.
Wonderful.
Let me turn
I'm curious. So, no, go. I was just curious. When do you make time for writing, and how do you even get that?
Whenever I can, but all too often, I mean, it's forced me to become more of a night bird than I used to be, because it's only when the pressures in life stop, the phone calls stop, the visitors stop, the demands stop around, after 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night, that I have the quietness and the space to sit and write. Sometimes if the day has been too tiring, then I'll collapse at that point and instead wake up early and write. So it depends on the day. But I just can't have a pattern. I've done a lot of writing till 2 and 3 a.m. and sometimes even past that. But I've also done some early morning writing. And then at various stages, when I wrote my first novel, The Great Indian Novel, which was really my first sort of major success of a book, I remember I was a young UN official. I was also a young parent. I would be doing things like writing on scraps of paper, resting on the steering wheel while waiting in the parking lot for my wife to return from shopping for the babies, that kind of stuff. It's just, you wrote whenever you could. If you cared enough, if it mattered enough to you, you squeeze the moments out wherever you can.
Wow.
Let me ask you an unrelated question, though, but it's connected to something else you said. Because a key idea that is emerging from your writing is that just because you're good at something, it doesn't ensure you're happy doing it. So if success in a given field is not enough for happiness, what brings happiness? What, in your view, brings happiness?
I love this question because this question will always have a different answer depending on who you're asking. And that at least is what I aim to teach people, that success is not an absolute. Success is not relative. It's always an absolute. It's your definition that will make you successful or not. Because if you were to try and ape somebody else's success, you will essentially be living their life. For me, success, Mr. Tharoor, is very simple. It's the ability to spend time on things that I would love to do as against things that I have to do because the world tells me to.
Then politics is not for you, Ankur.
You will resonate with that a lot, because your time would I would imagine go into a lot of things that the world requests you, demands you to, as against much you would want to.
So that's true. So don't go into politics, because as long as you're in politics, a lot of your time is devoted to what other people's priorities are and not what your preferences would be, which is why I've always been astonished that most of the politicians I know have never retired. I will retire one day, and I look forward to it, because then I'll be able to do the things I want to do, read the books I want to read that are piling up on my shelves, watch the cricket matches I never have time to watch, instead of just following the scores on the net, etc. But anyway, that may be why I have probably more failures and roadblocks in life to talk about, even though I haven't dedicated any books to them. You, in your first book, talked about your failure resume. Why do you place so much emphasis on failure when, by and large, anybody who looks at you, hears you, reads you, realizes you're a huge success?
I think because it's a misconception, and you would agree with me that all successful people are failing. That isn't true. It will never be true of anybody. Everybody fails. So if there's anybody who's telling you failure is a stepping stone to success, that's a lie, because everybody fails, but not everyone succeeds. So there's certainly something between failure and success that makes success happen. And in my case, that answer is vehemently reflection. Until you don't reflect upon your failure, you will never have the opportunity to convert it into success, because you would just move on very quickly. And in our country, there is this notion that the minute we fail, we're like, jaldi jaldi karo, aage badho, kuch nahi hota. And that speed or urgency to get past our failure is also, unfortunately, the reason why failure doesn't help us succeed. So I talk about failure so actively because reflecting upon my failures has been the best form of redemption, if you will, that I've got despite failing.
That's marvelous. That's beautifully said. Okay, I'll take that, and I hope that others benefit from that same piece of sane advice. You also said the result of persistent efforts is a habit where you cannot not do the right thing. Now, what advice would you give people on where to direct their efforts and hit that magic not do the right thing spot?
I'd say it's all about being patient, and patience is such a virtue that particularly you and I were born into an era and in a country where patience with no choice of ours was part of our life. We had to wait for everything. We literally had to wait for everything. And today's generation, for no fault of theirs, is getting everything at the speed of thought. So it tricks them into believing that most good things in life could happen overnight if they wished for it or worked harder. But that's never going to be true. Now, the most meaningful things in life, love, contentment, fulfillment, peace, happiness, all of them are going to take time. And it will be years and years of you persisting at something that will ultimately get you to that point. And the only thing then that's helped me, and I'd certainly vouch for that for everybody else, is get into the habit of habits. Because habits dispense the least amount of energy for you to do something. Like if you were in a habit of waking up at a certain time, or reading, or writing, or listening, or exercising, or any such thing that you know you have to do, but it's a struggle or effort to get past, the shortest way for you to do that is to get yourself into a habit, as against pull yourself every day and convince yourself that that's the right thing to do, and do it twice every week and then feel great about it, but also feel guilty that you didn't do it for the remaining 5. So habit for me is such a wonderful way of living life, but it takes time. It takes time. Habits take time to build, but once you got into it, that's it. It's okay. Wonderful from there on. What's one habit that you are proud of in your life?
Oh, I don't know. I used to be able to say daily exercise, but of late, even that's fallen away. So the problem with habits is sometimes sticking to them, Ankur. I mean, I do think that because the pressures on you change from time to time, and the demands made of you change, habits also sometimes suffer. I mean, I certainly in politics, I lost the illusion that I'm totally in control of my day, my schedule, my hours, because politics is a profession where a heck of a lot of what you do depends on the expectations and demands of others. And I think in some ways that becomes a source of stress, I'll admit myself. I mean, I think in many ways, one of the things that, since I had a full 29-year career at the UN, one of the things that I would have perhaps enjoyed looking forward to at the end of that is total control over my own life and no, but in fact, I actually got into a profession which gives me even less control over my own life. But that's enough about me. I want to get back to you. You right. I mean, I have just a few more questions in my mind, and I must say that since we had that break, one of the things that occurs to me is you obviously have a very good sense of your audience, who you're talking to, who you're writing for, and I would guess that a large portion of them, if not all of them, are really Generation Now. The youngsters, people perhaps in their early 20s, that sort of audience. How would you describe that generation? What works for them? What matters to them? You mentioned a couple of traits already. They're impatient. They're used to things happening immediately. What else? I mean, how do you seed that generation, and how do you hope to guide them from your vantage point of 20 years beyond?
There are a few things that stand out, Mr. Tharoor, and remarkably so. One, as I mentioned early on, is the audacity of their ambition. They are not limited anymore by what their parents' journey has been, or has been the recommendation of their parents around a doctor and a lawyer and a CA and a engineer and the usual suspects. But they definitely have broadened their horizon, and they also see themselves as a global workforce, which I believe a large part has to be credited with the pandemic as well, and their ability to see that they're no longer geographically limited by any constraint. The fact that they have a mobile phone and an internet connection is enough for them to become a global citizen part of the workforce, which is brilliant. I also remarkably see an appreciation for money, not just to earn it, but to also use it wisely. And it's not so much about putting it in fixed deposits and just putting it into a savings account and letting it rust with the inflation chewing at it, but it's more about putting it to work so that they can see that money work for them. And in some way, they get to financial independence that liberates them from the chains of a salary or a corporate job or anything that contains them as against frees them up. But the last thing that I think characterizes them is this abundance of choice that they're sitting on. And that's wonderfully summarized in the 4-letter word that this generation lives with every day, and that's FOMO. The fear of missing out is so intense in their life, because the minute they make a choice, they're like, oh my God, what if the other choice that I left behind was a better one at that? And how would I go through it? Because if my friends make that choice and they have a better life, then I don't want to deal with that. And I think a large part of their confusion, their struggles, is around their ability to not navigate through the plethora of choices that they're sitting on. So they see somebody who's made those choices or is helping them make those choices, or at least think through them, that becomes then the perfect fuel for them to go through their life.
Yeah, that's true. Now, some of the topics in your book include things like dealing with office politics, other similarly difficult situations. How much of this was informed by your own personal experiences? And did you take advice you give your reader when you were personally going through those trying times? Or did you even acquire that sense to give that advice because you suffered?
Yeah, I'd say that in some way, this book is about how I have navigated through my life. And I was very particularly concerned about it because I know that my life has been mine to live, and that certainly doesn't warrant anybody else's attention on it. Definitely not to assume that it's a prescription. So I start my book with saying that this might very well be the worst book you'll ever read, because it's full of that one thing that I hate in life, and that's prescriptions. To suggest that there is only a finite and a deterministic way of living life, and if you were to go left and right of that, you're not going to live it the right way, because that's not true. It isn't. Everybody's life is going to be different. So my hope in this book was to give people some food for thought so that they can come up with their own answers to the same questions that I've asked, and in some way have a boundary or a mental model to think around, as against just picking this up as the only truth and then go about implementing it as if that was the only thing that was right.
Right. Now you do divide the new book into 4 parts: managing your life, your career, your other people, and yourself. Can the same approach work for all 4? Which is most important, and why?
100% the most important is the last section, managing yourself. I think everything stems from that. The conversations that you have with your own self defines literally everything that happens to you in your life, because a large part of it is outside of your control. You don't control what people think of you, what they tell you, what happens to you. What you essentially control is how you react to everything, your reactions to circumstances. And that's always that conversation inside of you. It's almost never about what somebody else has done, but how you perceived it. And that's why one of my favorite chapters in the book of the 36 questions that I answered is the last one, which is how to become your best friend. If you were to have the ability to think of yourself as your best friend, irrespective of the secrets you hold and the weaknesses that you have and everything that you think of yourself as a fallacy, you will find meaningful relationships with people, with circumstances, with events, with everything that were to unfold. And that will be, in my opinion, the most meaningful way of living.
Sure. No, that's very good advice. And I must say, you do talk about building good communication skills and how important it is to be a storyteller. And you're clearly very good at explaining yourself. You do so succinctly. You do it precisely. The big issue very often with good communicators, and certainly, I'd like to think that sometimes I've been in that category and have been accused of the same thing, is they say that it's all in the delivery or the language. They use words like glib or slick, and they say, oh, there's really no substance there. I disagree. I think the only reason that one can communicate effectively is if one has substance to communicate. Otherwise, people will very quickly stop listening, in my view. But how do you feel about substance and delivery, the tale itself, and the telling of the tale? And especially since you have been a storyteller.
Yeah, it's a tough path to travel on because particularly in our country, and I'm sure you recognize with this, a lot of people just equate communication with your grasp over the English language, and that's just like Mr. Tharoor will define the epitome of communication because of his control over the language, and everyone will of course go gaga, and you'll be the subject of both praise and in some way mockery. But the truth is, at least in my experience, Hindi is my first language. I'm a Kashmiri, but I'm unfortunately not even trained very well to speak Kashmiri. I think in Hindi.
My late wife would never forgive me. She was always tough on any Pandit she met who couldn't speak Kashmiri.
I know. There are so many ways in which I do not classify as a Kashmiri that it's not even funny, and I'll not even go there. But the Hindi in me is the defining mode of communication, and I have realized over time that there are two things that you require to be a communicator. You need to be a storyteller, and you need to be an effective listener, and that's devoid of language. Because storytelling is just so ingrained in our culture that was the way that we got to know of the world. Our grandparents, our parents, they taught us about the world through stories. And we live in a country where stories are dime a dozen. They're literally everywhere, from past to folklore. So you'll never escape a way to communicate your idea, your message through a story if you feel passionate about that. And second is just listen, because when you listen, the world will actually tell you how they wish to be communicated with. That's the beauty of it. It's remarkable how many people ask me, hey, where do you get your content ideas from? And I'm like, if there's anybody living in India that says I've run out of content, that person has stopped living in India. Like, we are a country that's generating billions of ideas every single second because of what we are going through and what we are told. So you're never going to run out of content if you're listening. And that just makes you into a communicator. Your Hindi or your colloquial language is just a form of delivery, and you will always have an audience irrespective of which language you choose, as long as you weave stories inside it and you're actually listening more than speaking.
Great. Well, that works for you certainly, Ankur. And I need to do more of that, I think, myself, but I've done a fair bit of it over the years, and I value it too. So let me ask you a tough question for you as a storyteller about the style as well as the content. Why not just use the word stuff rather than the last word of the titles of your books? Why not do epic stuff?
Are we ever going to get Mr. Tharoor on record saying the word?
No, you're not. That's why I'm asking.
Well, no, there's a story behind it, and the poster isn't new in some way evangelizing the book. This is my life motto. My very deep friends about a decade back gave me on my birthday this poster that said "Do Epic Beep," and I put it on my table thinking it was a really cool poster and so on. But the more I stared at it, I recognized this is how I want to live life. It's about doing, which is action greater than thought. It's epic, which is doing something bigger than the orbit you were formed in. And it's S because of the fun that you have doing it. So it's colloquial for that. It's just the Gen Z way of bringing something to the forefront. So it's about doing things that are bigger than you and you having fun while you're doing it. And it resonates
Where is
with
the
the
fun in doing that?
to.
I mean, that's something that everybody does because nature obliges them to do it. It's not fun at
You're
all.
taking it figurative. You're taking it literally.
I am taking it very literally, exactly. Okay, listen, and in an age that we're living in of Instagram filters, perfectly curated social media feeds and all that, what about authenticity? I mean, I know that in some ways that title screams authenticity in people. So, I mean, so my question to you really is, do you think that authenticity is integral to your success as a content creator, as an author, as a YouTuber? Do you feel that it's essentially important to be yourself? Or is part of being yourself or being an effective version of yourself require curating a certain image and a perfect filtered look and a filtered sound. That's really a question that more and more people in this younger generation are going to have to live with, because, as you say, they're terribly aware of what they're seeing on other their best friends' Facebook posts and their Instagram posts, and worrying whether they've missed out on something that somebody else is doing, and so on. Tell me, and let's talk about authenticity as the last thing we'll talk about to wrap up this conversation. I think we've already exceeded the time they had intended for us.
Sure. I often say this, Mr. Tharoor, do not try and impress people. Do your thing and see who is impressed. And that is my way of building my tribe. So if you were to be authentic, you will attract somebody or the other. That's an eventuality. The question is, if you want to be authentic and yet attract everyone, that may not happen. And in that sense, you were perhaps not truly authentic. So I just play my book on authenticity, and I am exactly the way I am. You were to meet me in a mall or over the Zoom call or any place else in my videos, you will always find the same person. I'm not putting up a facade. There is no mask. And because of this, I'm just attracting people who would gravitate towards me for whatever reason. And that does mean that I will say no to a lot more. And that's perfectly fine, because I'm okay with that.